not your ordinary church.
Good morning. What is it about our culture and society's need to be right and need for others to be wrong? What is it that drives our need as a culture and as a society too often as expressions of faith and practice that fuels our need for others to give up their way of thinking and join us, denying diversity, rejecting multiculturalism, somehow stricken, I think, with an amnesia, especially in the church, that we are a country self-identified as a melting pot. That we are a country that began by saying we want to be able to worship and practice our faith as we will without the government telling us what we will and will not do. What has happened to us in the meantime? Have we decided that religious freedom is too difficult? Do we really want theocracy? Do we really want the government overseeing our practice of faith and belief? It seems over the last many years, even decades, there are those who are wanting just that kind of thing. We have expended a huge amount of energy getting the Ten Commandments into government buildings and or out of government buildings. I have participated in, and maybe you have too, that practice of dueling quotes from our founding fathers about the role of religion in the beginnings of our nation and our government. And currently, one of the most recent battles directed at Islam and our Muslim brothers and sisters. Our own state joining other states and passing a law to ban foreign law from being implemented in the U.S. and influencing our courts. It passed our Senate here in Kansas 33-3. This move is directed specifically at the idea of Sharia law in the Muslim community. It is a law passed based on fear and is interesting, I think, on several levels. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I'll yield to those who are. One is that it uses the language of foreign law. And I'm curious if the writers of the law regarded the concept of this law being challenged in court one day with the idea that laws based on the Bible are foreign laws. It's also interesting, a Sharia law is simply an interpretation of the Quran as how one applies the teachings of the Quran to daily life. In some respect, it would be the same as saying the court system and the law of the land can no longer consider religious practice and freedom in making decisions. Denominational differences, how Christians live out the faith. I think it's going to be an interesting journey as we, as a country, consider these things. Now, many Christians cite the violence of some Muslims in the passing of these kinds of laws. But oftentimes, the church, many Christians refuse to acknowledge our own history of violence, bloodshed, and bigotry. The Crusades, when they happened, it was thought that it would be better for a Muslim infidel to die rather than run the risk of them somehow converting a Christian to Islam. Now, I've had conversations with some. Some will say that, well, that was just the Catholics, not us. But other forms of Christianity are not immune. The Puritans who came here for freedom of religion and then burned persons at the stake for what they believed to be practice of witchcraft, the witch hunts of Europe. Both Catholics and Protestants participated in those atrocities. When Trudy and I traveled to Boston last year, we went to Salem and read the story about how religious hysteria caused the death of so many. And it was not just witchcraft, but there were other burnings, other deaths for the cause of heresy, or lesser punishments, such as the stocks for those who would not toe the line religiously or politically. Some will say, oh, those weren't really Christians. They just claimed to be Christians. And I wouldn't argue with that. But I want to know why that same grace, that same understanding, that same leeway is not offered to those of other religions now, rather than painting all others who are different than us with the same broad brushstroke. We have seen what theocracy is like. We have witnessed throughout history what happens when religion and state are too thoroughly mixed. They called it the Dark Ages for a reason. But it seems, especially of late, we are doomed to repeat ourselves. We just keep trying to get it mixed in there, even when we should know better. Our country is becoming more and more that melting pot, more and more that multicultural setting where we encounter and have to learn to live with people of different beliefs, different colors, different philosophies. I think it's a wonderful thing. But in order for it to work, there has to be respect and understanding on all sides. I think of prayer in school, prayer in government meetings, even for me, even public prayer. Part of me always wants to ask those who pray at these events, or who ask me to pray at these events and gatherings, what exactly are they wanting? Why do they want a prayer to start the city council meeting? Why do they want a prayer on the street corner to start a whatever kind of event? What is it they're asking? It reminded me of when I was in a previous community serving the church, and I was also on the school board at the time. It was shortly after 9/11 of 2001. And I had a person come by the house with the idea of having a prayer before the Friday night football game, and if I would be supportive of the idea if they brought it to the next school board meeting. One of the few times I think I actually thought and said the right thing at the right time. At the time, we weren't practicing having prayer before football events or basketball or school events. And so it triggered that question. So I asked her, why do you want to have a prayer before the football game? After several levels of reasoning, the person finally said, well, there are a lot of folks in the stands that may be the only opportunity they have to hear the gospel if they don't attend a church somewhere. And I replied, then my answer is no. I would not support it. She looked at me funny, and I said, well, because at that point, you've gone from praying to preaching. And there's two different things. Those are two different things. I went on to say, now, if you want to have a moment of silence to honor those who lost their lives in New York City, to honor those who are working and grieving and struggling with this tragedy, I would support that wholeheartedly. Prayer and speech in public, in general, I believe, but especially in government-sponsored meetings, including public schools and gatherings, should probably be done away with altogether. But if they are not, they need to be non-sectarian, respectful, sensitive, and understanding of all those who are present and their various religious and or non-religious views. Or move to a moment of silence to be interpreted by the individual, not by the leader. Prayer in school and other places is not against the law now. However, it is when I make you pray with me. Then it becomes disingenuous and offensive, and I believe not only to us, but to the Spirit. It is that amnesia thing again. Only this time it isn't with our country's history, it's with our faith. Do you remember Jesus' words about praying in public? Do you remember Jesus' words about practicing your religion and your faith in public? One of the few times he spoke that's recorded in our Gospels where he really didn't leave it up to much interpretation. He was pretty clear. If you're going to pray, go in the closet. If you're going to practice your faith out in public, do it secretly so nobody sees. Although many still try to justify those kind of actions to dismantle these teachings, I believe he was pretty clear. But I tend to think it was pretty clear that Jesus talked about be careful before you speak. Be careful before you practice. That it's about genuine faith and not preaching and conversion. For those of us in the Judeo-Christian faith tradition, we have a lot of laws. A lot of laws that we say don't matter anymore, don't apply anymore. Of course, that depends on who you ask. A lot of guidance we're given as to how to practice and live into and live out our faith in the world. It's the Torah, our roots. It's part of our story. And of course, we have the Second Testament, the stories of Jesus, the writings of Paul. Others who try to speak to what it means to live out this Christian faith. Not interpreted the same by everybody under that umbrella. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not so naive to think our religious tradition and our faith, our ethic, our philosophy does not affect our decisions and even the way decisions are made in our government. For if our faith, tradition, and practice and our common humanity, our ethic, does not shape and mold who we are and how we think, how we work and live in the world, then what purpose does it have? It should shape us. It should make us who we are. The problem, of course, is when I decide my religion and my thought process and my ethic is the only legitimate way to think and make decisions. Then our faith does not serve humankind or our country or our planet well. As much as some seem to think this is the way it ought to be, I really don't think this is what we want. I really don't think this is beneficial to our country or to our church. For we progressives, it's time for us to be more vocal in expressing the other point of view. There's more than one way to think about these things. There are those who say we need to exist somewhere in the middle, to work for common good among the extremes. And I'm not opposed to that. There is something to be said for standing in the middle, finding middle ground. And at the same time, there is some truth in the old saying, if you're going to stay in the middle of the road, you're going to get run over. I think in some respects, it feels a bit like we are on a very slippery slope to somewhere we don't want to go. And those of a more progressive and liberal viewpoint need to wake up and recognize what, I loved this illustration, what Chuck Fager, a Quaker activist theologian, said: God is like a wet bar of soap. None of us have an exacting view of the Spirit. None of us have a firm grip on God. None of us have the market cornered on God. And that is reason for pause in a society so addicted to rightness. And because of that fact, I would say, regardless of what the Founding Fathers intended, regardless of which quote we make to make our point, separation of church and state is not only a good idea, it is crucial, necessary, and a fundamental principle if we are to remain free. Free as individuals, free as faith communities, free as a country. If there's going to be truly justice for all. I say, practice your faith behind the scenes. And then speak up. Stand up for compassion. Stand up for mercy. Stand up for kindness and humility. Wise in the ways of the Spirit. Bold in the ways of justice. Graceful in relationship with all creation. Let those you encounter see how much you love. Not whether you think your doctrine is right or not. May it be so. And may it be now. Amen.